Princess Isabella had always known this day would come, but she never imagined it would feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. The mahogany doors of the palace library closed behind her with a soft thud, leaving her alone with the letter that would change everything she thought she knew about her family's legacy. The envelope bore her grandmother's elegant handwriting, addressed simply to "My dearest Isabella, to be opened on your 25th birthday." Queen Victoria had passed away 3 years ago, but her presence still filled every corner of palace. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the cream-colored paper, revealing words that would shatter her understanding of her royal heritage. "My beloved granddaughter," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you have reached the age when truth becomes more important than comfort. What I am about to tell you has been a closely guarded secret for over 2 decades, known only to myself and your late grandfather." Isabella sank into the leather armchair by the window, her heart racing. Outside, the palace gardens stretched endlessly, meticulously maintained and utterly beautiful, just like the image of perfection the royal family had always presented to the world. "Your father, Prince James, whom you have always believed to be of noble birth, was actually adopted into our family when he was just 3 years old. His biological parents were common folk, a teacher and a carpenter from the countryside who died tragically in an accident. James himself has never known the truth." The letter continued to explain how Queen Victoria and her late husband had chosen to keep this secret to protect James from those who might question his legitimacy as heir to the throne. They had destroyed all records of the adoption and created an elaborate fiction about his birth that even James believed to be true. Isabella read the words again, unable to fully process their meaning. Her father, the dignified Prince James who had taught her about duty, honor, and the sacred responsibility of royal blood, was not of royal blood at all. Everything she had been taught about her lineage, her divine right to rule, her inherent superiority, it was all built on a foundation of lies. The letter revealed more shocking details. Queen Victoria wrote about how James had actually been chosen specifically because of his character, not his bloodline. Even as a young child, he had displayed remarkable kindness, intelligence, and natural leadership. The royal couple had been struggling with fertility issues and had decided that choosing an heir based on merit rather than accident of birth might actually strengthen the monarchy. "James became a better prince than many who were born to the role," the letter continued. "His common origins gave him empathy for the people he would one day serve. His adoptive status made him work harder to prove himself worthy of the crown. In every way that matters, he has exceeded our greatest hopes." Isabella's mind raced with implications. If her father wasn't of royal blood, what did that make her? What did it make her younger brother, who was being groomed to inherit the throne after their father? How many other secrets were hidden in the palace walls? The letter addressed her concerns with remarkable prescience. "You may be wondering what this means for your own identity and future. Let me be clear, you are no less royal for learning this truth. Royalty is not about blood. It is about service, dedication, and the commitment to put the welfare of your people above your own comfort." But Isabella struggled to accept her grandmother's words. She had been raised to believe that royal blood was sacred, that it carried within it some divine spark that separated royalty from common people. The elaborate ceremonies, the emphasis on lineage and bloodlines, the very foundation of monarchical authority, how could any of it matter if it was all arbitrary? She thought about her father, who at this very moment was in his study preparing for a state dinner with foreign dignitaries. He would dress in formal attire adorned with medals and honors, completely unaware that his entire understanding of his identity was false. The thought of his potential pain if he ever learned the truth made Isabella's chest tight with anxiety. Then she thought about her carefree younger brother who had always seemed perfectly suited for royal life, embraced the pageantry and tradition with genuine enthusiasm, never questioning the system he was born into. How would this revelation affect him? Would it liberate him from the pressure of royal expectations, or would it devastate his sense of identity? The library around her was filled with centuries of royal history, portraits of ancestors, genealogical charts, books documenting the divine right of kings. All of it suddenly seemed hollow, like elaborate stage props in a play that had run too long. Yet Isabella also noticed things she had never seen before. The books about social reform tucked between volumes of royal protocol, the portraits that seemed to emphasize character over noble bearing, The subtle signs that perhaps her family had always been more progressive than their public image suggested. A soft knock at the library door interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness," came the voice of Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had worked at the palace for over 30 years. "Your father is asking for you. The guests will be arriving soon for dinner." "I'll be there in a moment," Isabella called back, her voice somehow steadier than she felt. She carefully folded the letter and slipped it into her evening bag. The state dinner would go on as planned, but everything had changed. As she rose from the chair and smoothed her dress, Isabella caught sight of herself in the antique mirror hanging beside the window. She looked exactly the same as she had an hour ago, but she felt like a completely different person. The young woman staring back at her was no longer a princess by divine right, but by choice and circumstance. The question that would haunt her in the days to come was already forming. What would she choose to do with this knowledge? Would she protect the family secret as her grandmother had done, or would she find a way to transform this revelation into something that could change the monarchy itself? Walking toward the library doors, Isabella realized that her 25th birthday had given her more than just shocking family history. It had given her the power to decide what kind of royal she wanted to be, and what kind of future she wanted to help create for the institution she had inherited. The palace corridors stretched ahead of her, lined with portraits of ancestors both real and imagined, but Isabella no longer felt intimidated by their stern gazes. For the first time in her life, she understood that being royal was not about who you were born to be, but about who you chose to become. The state dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and diplomatic conversation. Isabella found herself watching her father with new eyes as he effortlessly charmed the foreign ambassadors and their spouses. Prince James moved through the evening with the natural grace that had always made him beloved by both the people and visiting dignitaries. But now Isabella saw something different in his manner, a genuine warmth that seemed to come from understanding rather than entitlement. During a brief moment when the conversation turned to agricultural policies, Isabella noticed how her father's eyes lit up as he discussed programs to support rural farmers. He spoke with detailed knowledge about crop rotation, soil conservation, and the challenges facing small family farms. These weren't topics typically covered in royal education, yet James demonstrated a deep understanding that could only come from personal experience or genuine care. The key is remembering that behind every policy are real families trying to make honest livings from the land, James said to the Minister of Agriculture from the neighboring kingdom. "We must never lose sight of the human element in our governance." Isabella felt a chill of recognition. These words could have come from someone who understood struggle from the inside, not from someone born into privilege. Had her grandmother's letter revealed not just a secret, but the explanation for her father's exceptional ability to connect with common people. After the guests departed, Isabella found herself alone within the small sitting room where they had spent countless childhood evenings. Her younger brother was sprawled in his favorite armchair, still in his formal dinner jacket, but with his bow tie loosened and hanging around his neck. "That was exhausting," said with a dramatic sigh. "Sometimes I think Father actually enjoys these state dinners." He was practically glowing during that conversation about agricultural subsidies. Isabella began carefully. "Have you ever wondered why Father seems so different from other royals we meet? The way he connects with people, the way he seems to genuinely understand their concerns." Looked at her with curiosity. "I suppose I always assumed it was just his personality. Why do you ask? You've been acting strange all evening." Isabella hesitated. The weight of her grandmother's secret felt enormous, but she realized she needed to share this burden with someone. Deserved to know the truth about his own heritage, even if it changed everything for him. "If I tell you something that will change how you see our family, our position, everything we've believed about ourselves, are you prepared to hear it?" Sat up, his casual demeanor shifting to concern. "Isabella, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Isabella pulled out the letter and handed it to her brother. "Grandmother left this for me to read on my 25th birthday. I think you should read it too." Read in silence, his expression changing from confusion to shock to something approaching wonder. When he finished, he set the letter down gently and was quiet for several long minutes. "So Father is," he began, "adopted from a common family he doesn't know. And we're the of a teacher and a carpenter," Isabella finished. stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the palace grounds that stretched into darkness. "You know what's strange?" he said finally. "This explains so much, but it also changes everything." Isabella joined him at the window. "What do you mean?" "I've always felt like I was trying to live up to something I didn't understand," said quietly. "All this talk about royal blood and divine right, it never felt real to me. But Father's connection to people, his ability to understand what they need, that always seemed authentic. And now we know why. The question is, what do we do with this knowledge?" Turned to face his sister. "Do we tell Father? Do we keep grandmother's secret? Do we change how we see our own roles?" Isabella had been wrestling with the same questions all evening. "I keep thinking about what grandmother wrote, that royalty is about service, not bloodline. If that's true, then maybe this revelation is actually a gift." "How so?" "Think about it. We've been raised to believe we're inherently superior to the people we serve. But if our grandfather was a carpenter and our grandmother was a teacher, then we're connected to those people in the most fundamental way. We're not separate from them, we are them." Nodded slowly. "It would mean our authority comes from our ability to serve effectively, not from some accident of birth." "Exactly. And it would mean that every person in our kingdom has the potential to rise to any position based on their character and abilities, not their family background." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the implications of this new perspective. Finally, spoke again. "There's something else to consider. If we decide to reveal this truth publicly, it could revolutionize how people think about monarchy itself." Isabella felt her pulse quicken. "You mean move away from hereditary succession based on bloodline?" "Why not? What if future rulers were chosen based on merit, character, and their ability to serve? What if the royal family became truly representative of the people?" The idea was radical, potentially explosive, and absolutely terrifying. It would upend centuries of tradition and challenge the fundamental assumptions of monarchical government. It would also require incredible courage and could result in the complete transformation or even abolition of the monarchy as they knew it. "The advisors would be horrified," Isabella said with a small laugh. "Father might be devastated to learn his entire identity is based on a fiction. The public might lose faith in the institution entirely. Or," said with growing excitement, "they might see it as the ultimate proof that anyone can serve their country with distinction, regardless of their origins." Isabella thought about the evening's dinner conversation, about her father's genuine understanding of agricultural challenges, about the way common people responded to him with real affection rather than mere dutiful respect. "There's something else to consider," she said. "What if Father already knows deep down? What if his exceptional ability to connect with people comes from some unconscious understanding of his true origins?" Raised an eyebrows. "You think he suspects?" "I think he leads with his heart in a way that suggests he understands struggle and ordinary life from the inside. Maybe that's why grandmother chose to tell us now, because we're old enough to help him process this truth." "So you think we should tell him?" Isabella looked around the sitting room where they had spent so many evenings discussing their futures, their duties, and their dreams. The portraits on the walls showed generations of royals, each maintaining the fiction of divine bloodline that her grandmother had finally revealed to be meaningless. "I think we should tell him," she said finally. "But more than that, I think we should ask him to help us figure out what this means for the future of our kingdom." Smiled for the first time since reading the letter. "You realize that if we go down this path, we might end up changing everything about how monarchy works." "Good," Isabella said with surprising firmness. "Maybe it's time." As they prepared to leave the sitting room and begin the most important conversation of their lives, both siblings felt the weight of history shifting around them. They were about to transform a family secret into a catalyst for institutional change, with no way of knowing whether they were saving the monarchy or destroying it. But for the first time in their lives, they felt like they had the opportunity to make their royal positions truly meaningful. The next morning found Isabella and outside their father's private study, both feeling as nervous as they had before their first public speeches. Through the heavy oak door, they could hear Prince James speaking quietly with his private secretary about the day's schedule. The normalcy of the conversation felt surreal given what they were about to reveal. Isabella knocked softly and waited for her father's invitation before entering. James looked up from his desk with a warm smile, but his expression grew concerned when he noticed the serious faces of his children. "You both look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently, setting aside the papers he had been reviewing. "Come, sit down. What's troubling you?" And Isabella exchanged glances before Isabella pulled the letter from her pocket. "Father, yesterday was my 25th birthday, and grandmother left something for me to read." She paused, searching for the right words. "What we learn changes everything we thought we knew about our family." James's expression grew more serious as he accepted the letter. Isabella and watched in silence as their father read, his face cycling through the same emotions they had experienced: confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally, a strange kind of recognition. When he finished reading, James set the letter down carefully and was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at his children with eyes that seemed both wounded and relieved. "Part of me always wondered," he said quietly. "There were little things, gaps in my early memories, the way Mother would change the subject when I asked about my birth, the fact that I seemed to understand common people's struggles in ways that puzzled even me." "You suspected?" Isabella asked. "Not consciously, but—" James walked to the window that overlooked the palace courtyard where staff members were going about their morning duties. "I remember being very young and feeling more comfortable talking to the kitchen staff than to visiting nobility. I remember being fascinated by the groundskeeper's work and asking endless questions about how things grew, how repairs were made, how the palace actually functioned." He turned back to face his children. "Mother always said I had a natural curiosity about how ordinary people lived, but now I understand it was something deeper than curiosity." Leaned forward in his chair. "How do you feel about learning this now?" James considered the question carefully. "Strangely, I feel relieved. For years, I've struggled with the disconnect between what I was taught about royal superiority and what I actually believed about human worth and dignity. Now I understand why those concepts never sat comfortably with me." "But doesn't this make you question everything about your position, your authority?" Isabella asked. "Actually, it makes me question the basis of that authority in a way that feels liberating," James replied. "If I've been an effective prince, it's not because of some magical royal blood flowing through my veins. It's because of the values I learned, the work I've put in, and the connections I've built with our people." Isabella felt a surge of excitement. "That's exactly what we were discussing last night. This revelation doesn't diminish your legitimacy. It proves that leadership should be based on character and ability, not bloodline. And it opens up possibilities for how we might evolve the monarchy itself," added. James looked at his children with new interest. "What kind of possibilities are you thinking about?" Isabella took a deep breath. "What if we used this truth to transform how succession works? What if instead of automatic inheritance, future rulers were chosen based on their demonstrated ability to serve effectively?" "You're talking about fundamental constitutional change," James said slowly. "The kind of change that would require parliamentary approval, public referendums, and would face enormous resistance from traditionalist factions." "Yes," said firmly, "but it would also demonstrate that the monarchy is willing to evolve in ways that serve the people better, rather than clinging to outdated notions of inherited superiority." James began packing the length of his study, a habit Isabella recognized from childhood whenever he was working through complex problems. "Let's think through the practical implications," he said. "If we revealed the truth about my adoption and proposed merit-based succession, what would be the likely responses?" "The traditionalists would be outraged," Isabella said immediately. "Many nobles would see it as a threat to their own hereditary privileges," added. "The press would have a field day with the scandal," James continued. "But," Isabella said with growing conviction, "many common people might see it as validation that their own worth isn't determined by their birth circumstances. Young people especially might embrace a system that rewards character over connections," observed. James stopped packing and looked directly at his children. "Are you prepared for the possibility that this could result in the end of the monarchy as we know it? That parliament might decide to transition to a purely elected system of government." "Would that necessarily be a bad thing?" Isabella asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they had been raised to believe. James sat back down at his desk and was quiet for several minutes before responding. Your grandmother once told me that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to remain relevant to the people it served, he said finally. If our relevance requires us to transform completely, then perhaps that transformation is necessary. So you're willing to consider this? Asked. I'm willing to explore it carefully and thoughtfully, James replied. But we would need to proceed with extraordinary caution. This isn't just about our family, it's about the stability of the entire governmental system. Isabella felt a thrill of possibility mixed with terror at the magnitude of what they were contemplating. How would we even begin? First, we would need to consult with constitutional scholars and legal experts to understand what changes would be possible within our existing framework, James said, his voice taking on the tone he used when addressing complex policy issues. We would need to gauge public opinion through careful polling and focus groups, added, his mind already working through the practical details. Most importantly, we would need to develop a clear vision of what we want the monarchy to become, not just what we want it to stop being, James concluded. What if we started with smaller changes? Isabella suggested. What if we began by being more transparent about how royal duties are fulfilled, more accountable for the public resources we use, more directly engaged with addressing real problems facing our citizens? A gradual evolution rather than revolutionary change, James mused. That might be more politically feasible and less likely to create instability. And it would give us time to prove that our legitimacy comes from our service, not our bloodline, said. James stood up and walked to a bookshelf filled with volumes on constitutional law and political theory. If we're going to pursue this, we need to educate ourselves thoroughly about the options and implications. Are we really going to do this? Isabella asked, hardly believing the conversation they were having. We're going to explore it, James said carefully. And if we decide to move forward, we're going to do it in a way that serves the best interests of our people, even if it means sacrificing our own privileged position. Looking at her father and brother, Isabella realized that her grandmother's letter had accomplished something remarkable. It had not only revealed a family secret, but had catalyzed a conversation about fundamental change that might never have happened otherwise. Grandmother would be proud of us, Isabella said softly. She would be proud that we're choosing courage over comfort, James agreed. As they began to outline their next steps for researching and exploring these momentous changes, all three felt the weight of history shifting around them. They were no longer just inheritors of tradition. They had become potential architects of transformation. 6 months later, Isabella stood before a packed parliamentary chamber, her heart racing as she prepared to deliver the most important speech of her life. The months of research, consultation, and careful planning had led to this moment, the public revelation that would either transform the monarchy or potentially end it. The journey to this point had been extraordinary. Working with constitutional experts, the royal family had developed what they called the proposal, a comprehensive plan for evolving the monarchy into what they termed a merit-based constitutional partnership with the people. During those months, they had quietly commissioned public opinion research that revealed surprising results. While many people valued the stability and continuity that the monarchy provided, a significant majority believed that leadership positions should be earned rather than inherited. Most remarkably, over 70% of respondents said they would respect the royal family more if they voluntarily reformed their own system to reflect democratic values. Prince James had chosen Isabella to present their proposal, recognizing that as a member of the younger generation, she would be seen as representing the future rather than defending the past. Sat in the gallery above, along with their father, whose quiet strength had guided them through months of preparation. Honorable members of Parliament, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens, Isabella began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. Today I stand before you not to defend the institution of monarchy as it has existed for centuries, but to propose how it might evolve to better serve our people in the modern world. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile to any royal presence in their chamber. 6 months ago, my family learned something that changed our understanding of ourselves and our role in this kingdom. We learned that my grandfather, Prince James, was not born into royalty, but was adopted into our family as a young child after his birth parents, a teacher and a carpenter, died tragically. A murmur swept through the chamber. This revelation had been kept secret until this moment, adding shock value to what was already an unprecedented situation. This discovery forced us to confront an important question. If the most beloved and effective ruler in our recent history gained his position not through bloodline, but through character and merit, what does that tell us about the basis of legitimate leadership? Isabella gestured to where her father sat in the gallery. Prince James has served our kingdom with distinction for over 2 decades, not because royal blood flows through his veins, but because he has demonstrated compassion, wisdom, and genuine commitment to the welfare of our people. Today, I am here to propose that our kingdom officially recognize what we have learned through experience. That leadership should be based on proven ability to serve, not accident of birth. The chamber erupted in a mixture of applause and shouts of protest. Isabella waited for quiet before continuing. The proposal, which has been distributed to all members, outlines a gradual transition to a system where future monarchs would be chosen through a combination of demonstrated public service, parliamentary confirmation, and ultimately, popular approval through national referendum. She explained how the system would work. Members of the royal family would compete for succession by proving their effectiveness in various public service roles. They would be evaluated based on measurable outcomes in areas like education, healthcare, economic development, and social welfare. Parliament would assess their qualifications, and the people would have the final say through a democratic process. This is not about abolishing monarchy, Isabella emphasized. This is about transforming it into something that reflects our deepest values of equality, merit, and democratic participation. The opposition leader stood to respond. Your Highness, while your family's transparency is commendable, are you asking us to believe that centuries of constitutional tradition should be overturned based on one family revelation? Isabella had anticipated this challenge. Honorable sir, I'm asking you to consider whether our constitutional traditions should serve the people or whether the people should serve constitutional traditions. The evidence suggests that merit-based leadership produces better outcomes for citizens than hereditary succession. She cited examples from their research. Countries that had transitioned to merit-based systems showed improvements in governance effectiveness, public trust, and citizen engagement. She presented data from their own kingdom showing that the most successful royal initiatives had come from family members who had earned their positions through demonstrated competence. Furthermore, Isabella continued, we propose that this transition occur gradually with extensive public consultation at every stage. No changes would be implemented without clear majority support from the citizens we serve. The debate that followed was intense and sometimes heated. Traditionalist members argued that stability required unchanging institutions. Progressive members questioned whether any form of monarchy could be truly democratic. Moderate voices sought compromise solutions. Through it all, Isabella remained composed, answering questions with the thorough preparation that months of study had provided. When asked about the risks of change, she acknowledged them honestly while arguing that the risks of stagnation were greater. The institution of monarchy will not survive the 21st century unless it evolves to reflect 21st century values, she said during one particularly pointed exchange. We can choose to lead that evolution, or we can allow irrelevance to choose for us. The turning point came when an elderly parliamentarian, known for his conservative views, stood to speak. Your Highness, he said slowly, I have served in this chamber for 35 years, and I have never heard a member of the royal family speak so honestly about the limitations of their own institution. That honesty itself suggests that perhaps your family has earned the right to continue serving, whether through birth or through character. The session ended without a vote, but with an agreement to establish a special committee to study the proposal in detail. Public reaction, when it came, was overwhelmingly positive. Polls showed that citizens appreciated the royal family's willingness to question their own privilege and propose fundamental reforms. That evening, Isabella joined her father and brother on the palace balcony where they often gathered to process difficult days. The city spread out below them, its lights twinkling like a reflection of the night sky. How do you think it went? Asked. Better than I dared hope, Isabella replied. The questions were tough but fair. I think people are ready for this conversation. James, who had remained mostly quiet since returning from Parliament, finally spoke. You know, When I read Mother's letter 6 months ago, I thought it might destroy everything we had built. Instead, it gave us the opportunity to build something better. Do you think it will actually happen? Isabella asked. The transition to merit-based succession. I think we've started something that will continue with or without us, James replied. The idea that leadership should be earned rather than inherited, that's not going away now that it's been spoken aloud. Over the following months, the Special Parliamentary Committee conducted extensive public hearings, constitutional reviews, and pilot programs testing elements of the proposed system. The process wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, compromises, and moments when the entire initiative seemed in jeopardy. But gradually, something remarkable emerged. The kingdom began implementing what became known as the system, a hybrid approach that maintained constitutional monarchy while introducing merit-based evaluation for succession, regular public accountability reviews, and expanded democratic participation in royal selection. Prince James became the first monarch to voluntarily submit to a public approval referendum, which he won with over 80% support. Isabella, and began competing for future succession through distinguished service in education reform and healthcare innovation, respectively. More importantly, the entire process had sparked a broader conversation about democracy, merit, and public service that extended far beyond the royal family. Citizens became more engaged in governance, public servants faced higher standards of accountability, and the kingdom became a model for how traditional institutions could evolve without losing their essential stabilizing function. Years later, when historians wrote about this period, they would mark it as the moment when a monarchy chose to transform itself rather than wait to be transformed by others. They would note that it began with a family secret that could have been buried, but instead became the foundation for unprecedented institutional change. Isabella often thought about her grandmother's letter and the choice it had given them to protect comfortable lies or embrace difficult truths. They had chosen truth, and in doing so, had discovered that authenticity and transparency were not threats to legitimate authority, but its most powerful sources. The monarchy had indeed reached a turning point, but not toward irrelevance or abolition. Instead, it had turned toward a future where royal service truly meant serving the people, and where leadership was a privilege that had to be earned anew by each generation. Standing in the same library where she had first read her grandmother's letter, Isabella smiled as she watched her young niece playing in the gardens below. That little girl would grow up in a world where she knew that her worth would be measured not by her bloodline, but by her contributions to the common good. And that, Isabella realized, was the greatest gift any family could give to the future.